sick of all the division that's in this country.
I'm sick of political brainwashing.
Sick of food prices. Everybody needs to live.
I'm sick of fake people.
I'm sick of clickbait.
Being glued to my phone.
The name calling, it just further divides them.
I'm sick of willful ignorance.
I'm so sick of war.
I'm a teacher and I'm sick of working hard and not getting much back.
I'm sick of having to do everything.
I'm sick of there not being enough consideration.
Being taken advantage of.
I'm sick of competing with a computer.
I am definitely sick of government overreach.
Sick of minimum wage.
What's happened to us, as a society?
Discontent. No doubt it's pervasive. What I mean is, when the things we are sick of begin to outweigh what we're grateful for, it feels like an infection of sorts. A disease of, disappointment? Or a low-grade resentment spreading rapidly among us? Unchecked, I suspect our discontents breed a nasty cycle of disconnection in every part of our lives. Disconnection rooted in a lack of giving others the benefit of the doubt, not understanding that, like us, there's something underneath their surface level frustrations. And I wonder, can we break that cycle once it's gained momentum?
It is the question of our time. Is it all the smartphone's fault? It's the question that everybody seems to be asking, whether it's the mental health crisis, the political crises, or just seemingly everything in the world going to shit at the same time. Is it the smartphone's fault? Is everything being driven by our obsession and addiction to the devices in our pockets? NYU professor and best-selling author Jonathan Haidt argues, yes, it is the smartphone's fault. He believes there's a direct correlation between smartphones, social media news feeds, front-facing cameras, and pretty much everything going wrong in society at the same time. His new book is chock full of data and charts supporting this claim, and he particularly focuses on the mental health crisis among young people. Now, my personal belief is, I think it's complicated. I don't think it's as simple as smartphones equal bad, smartphones ruin kids. As somebody who's very familiar with the data on this subject, this story is very complex and there's a lot of nuance to it.
Over 50% of people say that they feel at least a little bit lonely in their lives. 27% of people said that they feel very lonely in their lives. Last year, 1 in 3 Americans say that they feel socially isolated from others. Since the 90s, the number of people who say that they have 0 friends has quadrupled in the US and tripled in the UK. And the marriage rate has fallen by over 60% in the last 2 generations. It's at a record low, and a stunning 57% of single people say that they have given up or have no interest in dating. Yet this is happening in a time where the world is more connected than ever, more of us live in closer proximity to each other than ever, and it is easier to keep in touch with the people that we care about more than ever.
Let's be honest. We all have blind spots. We make mistakes, misjudge situations, and sometimes, without even realizing it, we make life harder for ourselves and those around us. But the real problem? Most of us don't stop to notice. We get stuck in our own heads, assuming we understand more than we actually do. We listen just enough to respond, not enough to connect, and we move through life convinced that our version of reality is the only one that matters. This isn't about pointing fingers, it's about holding up a mirror, because the world we see isn't always the world as it is. And the gap between those two, that's where the disconnect happens. So here's the hard truth. What if you're not as aware as you think? This isn't a lecture. It's a chance to step back, question what you think you know, and start seeing the bigger picture.
John Dickerson is in conversation with columnist and author David Brooks, who's wondering what life might be like if we all felt just a little more seen and heard.
David Brooks is on a one-man mission aimed at no less than changing human behavior. So here we are on a street corner being watched. This is a good chance for both of us to be emotionally vulnerable and seen by everyone.
Right.
So what's your hope for this book, David?
Yeah, I'm hoping that people just learn to see each other, that there's one skill at the center of any healthy family, community, organization, or country. It's the ability to see each other and to make each other feel seen, heard, and understood.
For the last several years, Brooks has been on two writing tracks. His New York Times column addresses politics and society. His books have been an examination of character, morality, and personal architecture. His latest book, How to Know a Person, and he's the first to admit it's partly about how to know himself. Would you cop to your book being a self-help book?
I'm not shy about that. I'm trying to help myself, so right. So it's selfish. I'm trying to help myself, but I hope it'll be helpful to others. And in my view, every book should be a self-help book. You should be able to learn something that'll improve who you are.
Brooks is not just concerned with himself, though. He writes, "We're living in the middle of some sort of vast emotional, relational, and spiritual crisis. It is as if people across society have lost the ability to see and understand one another, thus producing a culture that can be brutalizing and isolating." If we don't see others, what are the stakes?
Well, I think there's nothing crueler than to be indifferent to someone, to make someone feel invisible. And that's happening. But the problem, the skill that I'm talking about, we don't teach it in school. And often we don't teach it anywhere.
The book's thesis is that while human relations are hard, the skills can be taught, and if people can improve their one-on-one interactions, in listening, in conversation, and in what Brooks calls the close at hand, it might have a compounding effect on society. You write about diminishers and illuminators. What's the distinction there?
Yeah, so my theory is that in any group of people, there are some people who are diminishers. They make you feel invisible, unseen. They're not curious about you. They stereotype you. They label you. And then there are other people who are illuminators. And they are people who are just curious about you, and they make you feel lit up.
To lift up those illuminators, Brooks started Weave, the social fabric project. For 6 years, the nonprofit has been supporting people who, as he says, are working to weave together the social fabric in their communities.
We intend to restore souls here.
People like Renee Mitchell in Portland, Oregon, who started the Soul Restoration Center.
I'm always, working with youth who don't see themselves reflected, so I have to give them something that says that I see you, I honor you and your experiences.
She basically embodies everything I learned over 4 years of writing this book. She builds strength in people who have been wounded by injustices of society. And she's everything I'm not.
The challenge, as Brooks acknowledges, is that the forces of modern life, social media, partisanship, pull at our attention, rile us up, turn the other into the enemy. Even he was not immune to these forces recently. The now famous $78 tweet.
Yeah.
It's been seen some millions of times.
Yeah.
Last month, while eating at Newark Airport, Brooks posted about his $78 lunch of a burger and bourbon. "This is why Americans feel the economy is terrible," he wrote. The response was not favorable. He was accused of being misleading because the booze and not the food was pricey, accused of being out of touch, entitled, and worse. The post has been viewed more than 38 million times. Does that reaction surprise you?
It's like every screw up I've made on social media, not too many, but I thought about that tweet for like 3 seconds. And I sent it out, and it started out as being a joke. It was like a picture of a meal I was eating at an airport with a burger, fries, and bourbon. And it was probably the least healthy meal I hope I ate that week. And so it started out as, look, and it was $78. The joke in my head was, I can't even afford to make poor lifestyle choices. Right. But the way I wrote it was incredibly stupid. And so it seemed like I was oblivious to something that's blindingly obvious, which is that me, as a New York Times columnist and a well-off, lucky, privileged journalist, as if I'm not aware that that's very different than a family living paycheck to paycheck.
Brooks started as a Times columnist 20 years ago as the conservative on the op-ed page. He often infuriated liberals, but recently he says he's become more liberal, out of sync with much of the Trump era.
The Republican Party used to be the party, you weren't thrilled by them, but they were the business party. They knew how to run things. And that seems like eons or light years ago.
You wrote recently after the Republican debate that it demonstrated the disease of narcissistic hucksterism.
Yeah, I think that's what Donald Trump has brought into our life.
What's narcissistic hucksterism?
It's what Vivek Ramaswamy was doing in that debate. Yeah. It's like, you don't have to tell the truth. You just have to tell the entertaining thing that makes you a showman. How many human beings can take a mugshot and turn it into a positive thing for them?
So does David Brooks have the prescription to save us from ourselves? Or is he a lonely voice crying in the wilderness? One of the unifying ideas in politics, whether you're on the left or the right, is that these are dire times and the wolf is at the door. Yeah. And so in those times, do you worry that what you're prescribing in this book, which is to see the other, is naive? Because people are saying, well, fine, but the wolf's at the door, and I'm not going to say, boy, isn't that some nice fur you have?
Yeah, well, I don't think the wolf's at the door. I found it's very hard to
But everybody does. I mean, left and right. You know,
but not me.
Yeah.
I found it's very hard to hate people up close. All you have to do is show a little hint of humanity. And they say, oh. And then suddenly all the wolf at the door stuff diminishes. It's not naive to lead with trust. It's not naive to lead with respect. It's practical. And so I guess I reject the idea that I'm being like a babe in the woods in a world of wolves. I've got the tools that are the most aggressively effective at countering the wolf.
It's 11 p.m. You're staring at your laptop, promising yourself you'll finally get some work done. But your brain feels like it's been deep fried. The screen's glowing, the tabs are open, and your phone's still buzzing in your hand. But nothing is happening. It's not procrastination anymore. It's something worse. This is what it looks like when someone is absolutely cooked, mentally overloaded. Your brain isn't running on fumes, it's running on nothing, and most people don't even realize it. Being cooked doesn't always look like someone crying in a corner. Sometimes it looks like scrolling Instagram for hours, because the thought of doing anything else feels impossible. It's blanking on simple things, like why you walked into a room or what you were supposed to say. It's snapping at people over nothing, only to sit there later wondering, what's wrong with me? It's not feeling angry or upset. It's feeling nothing. And it feels normal. You don't even question it anymore. This endless haze, this perpetual feeling of whatever. Is this just what life has become? The truth is, you've probably been running on autopilot for so long you've forgotten what it feels like to actually be in control. You're overstimulated and underfocused. You're trapped in this endless loop of input, scrolling, streaming, texting, checking, and the idea of just being with yourself, that's become terrifying. Think about the last time you sat in silence and didn't immediately reach for your phone. When was the last time you actually gave your full attention to one single thing without feeling the pull of a dozen others? And this isn't entirely your fault. Everything around you is designed to keep you this way. Your phone, your apps, your notifications, they're all engineered to hijack your attention, to keep you distracted, to keep you cooked. You've been so busy keeping up with the noise, you've disconnected from everything that actually matters. You start things and never finish. You feel like you're falling behind no matter how hard you try. You're consuming way more than you're creating, and deep down you know it. But what if you stopped? Not stopped everything, just slowed down. What if you gave yourself permission to stop running on autopilot and actually take back control? No multitasking, no forcing your brain into overdrive just to survive another day. What if you focused on one thing, just one, for once? Because being cooked isn't just about being tired, it's about being lost. Lost from your purpose, from your goals, from the things that make life worth living. And if you don't stop this cycle, you're not just burning out. You're burning away the chance to create a life that actually means something. So, How do you fix it? You start small. Forget the overcomplicated plans or the endless productivity hacks. You don't need more motivation, and you don't need to push harder. You need less. Less noise, less distraction, less of the bullshit that keeps pulling you away from what matters. Turn off the noise, just for an hour. Put your phone down, leave it in another room, and look around. Really look. Is this your life? The one you chose? Or is it just the one you've settled into, dragging yourself through the motions day after day? You're not going to unfry your brain in a single night, and that's not the point. It's about taking one step, just one, to regain a little clarity. Make a choice that actually serves you, not the distractions pulling you apart. That one decision, no matter how small, is the first crack in the walls you've built around yourself. Because when your mind clears, life doesn't just feel lighter. It starts to make sense. Things align. The fog lifts. And in that moment, you'll see what needs to be done. That's when it really begins, the work that actually matters.
We're calling them the 3 paradoxes of modern loneliness, and we're going to break these down one by one. The first one is paradox number 1. We are more connected than ever, yet loneliness is at an all-time high. I actually heard a term just recently by the journalist Derek Thompson. He called it dopamine inequality. As soon as he said that, it hit home really, really hard because I've been experiencing this in my own social life. Social media, it's just a bucket of dopamine in your face over and over again. When you socialize with people in your real life, particularly people you don't know very well or people you just met, there's a lot of boredom and tedium that goes along with it. When you're sitting in front of a new person or a new friend, you'll fall into conversation topics that you don't find very interesting or that you don't necessarily agree with or that you don't really care about. And I think we've trained ourselves to just swipe away as soon as we hit that point. As soon as we hit anything that's like not very interesting to us or not stimulating or not giving us a dopamine hit, we swipe away mentally. The problem is that in-person social relationships require you to sit through a number of those tedious conversations or boring conversations that you don't really care about, put the effort in to listen, maybe respond in a way that steers the conversation towards something that you care about. And I've definitely been guilty of this in my own life. I've absolutely found that my threshold for tolerating social interactions that are not interesting to me is almost like 0 at this point. And it's to the point that it's actually a problem. And this is a conversation that's been happening in my house with my wife quite a bit. It's like we have to remind each other, give it another chance. Try again. They're probably a good person. Like, meet up with them more. I think the other aspect of this too is we're so used to just being satisfied immediately with an interaction with something that we don't realize that like building a friendship takes weeks, months, even years. Like you have to see somebody 10, 20, 30 times, yet we'll see somebody once, have a boring conversation, and then be like, that person's boring. I don't want to hang out with them. And then you go back to the phone. There's a momentum to intimacy and connection. To build up to the deep, meaningful stuff, you have to put in the hours in the surface level, less meaningful stuff. And people don't like hearing that, but it's true. It's just human nature. We don't tend to feel good about opening up to people that we haven't invested a lot of time or energy with and who we don't know super well. And if you do go from 0 to 100 in like 2 minutes and just start sharing your deepest, darkest secrets with essentially a perfect stranger, their reaction's not going to be meaningful to you. Like whether they reject you or give you advice or hug you and tell you it's okay, it's not going to feel nearly as impactful or profound as somebody you've been friends with for 10 years doing the same thing. I think the second issue around this is a social sorting effect. And I think this one is counterintuitive. The more connected we are with everybody around us, the easier it is to find like-minded people. This is well discussed when it comes particularly to politics, but I think this is true for everything. 30 years ago, if you were into meditation or yoga, you had to put in a lot of effort to go find other people who were into meditation and yoga. If you were into pickleball, you had to put a lot of effort to go find other people to play pickleball with. Today, it's so easy. Whatever your interest or hobby or obscure niche obsession, you can find a subgroup of people who are also equally obsessed and interested in that thing. And that's great. That's actually, I would argue, one of the biggest benefits of social media and the internet. The problem is when you remove that friction from finding people who have the same interests as you, your tolerance level for people who don't have the same interests as you drops. So you become less patient with those who maybe aren't into the same things that you're in, and they want to show you the thing that they're into. Or it feels as though you should spend less time maybe hanging out with people who aren't going to do the same things that you're going to do. The same way this affects our politics of kind of putting us in an echo chamber, I think this puts us in a little bit of a social bubble where we really just want to cocoon ourselves with those who do the same things and think the same things as we do. And our tolerance level of people who are not into those things or who don't think those things drops.
Yeah, that's what big tech missed, I think, too. I've said this before, but social media is really good at just what you explained, is connecting us based on our similarities. It's really bad about getting us to connect on our differences. That's what they missed. That's what Zuckerberg missed. Yeah, you can sort us into these bubbles, but you can't get us to connect on our differences in any way, any meaningful way. Do you think too, Mark, that the evolution of social platforms in recent years too is making them even less personal? There's data coming out now that people are sharing less and less on social media platforms. They're being less social on social media platforms. Sharing has gone way down just in the last 3 or 4 years. People enjoy documenting their lives less frequently. They're becoming more passive consumers of content on these platforms. And what that's doing is it's kind of consolidating the content production within a smaller group of people, celebrities, influencers, people like you, I would say too. That's probably leading down a road where social media becomes less social and less personal.
I think 10, 15 years ago, social media was mostly social. I think today it's mostly media. There's a lot of stats around, I think it's on any given platform, 1% of the users will create 90% of the content. 9% of the users will respond. Basically, 9% will create the other 10%, and then the other 90% are responsible for less than 1%. So it's like 90% of users on social platforms are passive. They're not engaging, they're not commenting, they're simply looking.
You also have things like the TikTok algorithm, right? The For You algorithm. When TikTok came on the scene, then everybody started copying that algorithm, which was, we're not going to show you as much from your own real life network. We're going to show you more from the expanded pool of content that's out there all around the world. And so that is even another level of impersonalization of social media.
In the social media industry, the TikTok moment, if you talk to industry insiders, the way they describe it is going from the social graph to the interest graph, which basically TikTok's big innovation was realizing that everything pre-TikTok was organized around who are the people you want to follow? Who are your friends or the people you look up to or the celebrities you're a fan of? Tell us who those people are, and then we'll show you their content and you'll enjoy it. What TikTok figured out is that people ultimately just want to follow what they're interested in. You could be a perfect stranger, but if you give somebody the exact content that they're going to be interested in, you don't really care who they are. And so, yeah, it does make it more impersonal. And again, it kind of comes back to this point. It's like it's becoming less social and more media. It's becoming less keeping up with your cousins and aunt and uncle and more the same way you and I treated television when we were kids. Like you'd come home from school, you'd turn on the TV, you had no idea what was on, but you would just flip channels until you found something that looked interesting. And that is essentially what social media is becoming. And it's why I personally think it's going to replace a lot of traditional media and particularly linear television. But it's a conversation for another podcast. The problem with this, though, is that I think there's a lot of data that supports the idea that even when we do interact with friends and family members and people that we admire through social media, it's empty calories. The digital interactions do not provide the same emotional satiety that a face-to-face interaction provides. There's just something about being in the room with somebody, feeling their presence, reading the micro expressions of their body language, hearing the lilt in their voice, seeing the same things, hearing the same things, smelling the same things. You can't replicate that through an Instagram DM or a tweet thread. And it's kind of an obvious thing, but I think what we're seeing is that we're replacing quality social interaction with quantity. We're replacing depth of interaction with breadth. So we have access to more people than ever before, and we have access to more inspiring and smarter and more interesting people than ever before. But the quality of those interactions is a fraction of what it would be with somebody in person. But it's just the way we're wired, the way we seek reward and seek interesting things and novelty, it's hard to combat that within ourselves. Like it's always going to be sexier to hop on YouTube and find literally the best person in the world at this one thing and watch them and listen to them than to walk down the street and play pickleball with your neighbor or whatever. It's always going to be more enticing, I think. It's also, I mean, okay, I hate to say this, but if you are a person who, let's say you don't have great social skills, or you're kind of in a bad place in your life at the moment, a little bit depressed, maybe you suffer from a lot of social anxiety, social media apps, like, it's a quick fix. You can get a little bit of that satiation without any effort whatsoever. Like, it's completely risk-free. You can hop on Twitch or YouTube or leave a comment somewhere and maybe send an email, and it will feel good for a few seconds. And that's better than nothing, but at least you don't have to risk anything. You can do it from the comfort of your couch or your bed. So I think that's a real issue as well. And it probably plays into the mental health crisis. If you are somebody who suffers a lot from depression or anxiety, the fact that you have this kind of empty calorie solution that requires no risk or no real effort on your part really keeps you in the same place.
Yeah, it can be a very vicious feedback loop there, a very vicious cycle that you can get into.
David Brooks, welcome. It is just a delight to get to sit down to talk with you after reading the book.
Oh, thank you.
So as I was reading the book, How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen, I was thinking a lot about who the book was for, right? Books are for a reader, for an individual, right? But I was thinking at the same point, this book feels so much more like it's for society, for community right now. How are you thinking about who this book was written for?
Yeah, I was sitting on a plane recently, and there was a guy next to me, and he was reading a book on how to become a writer. And one of the chapters was pay close attention to your audience. And I was like, I feel like drawing an X through that. Like, don't pay attention to that chapter.
Yeah.
So we writers are working out our stuff in public. And so I'm not naturally good at seeing others. I'm not the most socially adept human being on the face of the earth. So I wrote this book to try to get better. One of my favorite sayings about writing is from Frederick Buechner, the novelist. We're beggars who tell other beggars where we found bread. So if I found something that's useful to make me become more socially adept, more good at seeing people, more good at making them feel understood, then I just take that and I try to pass it along. And so I wrote it for myself. But I would say I'm not the only person with this problem. And so I wrote it in part because we have this loneliness epidemic in society. We live in a society where 54% of Americans say that no one knows me well, where the number of people who say they have no close personal friends has gone up by fourfold since 2000, where 45% of high school students say they're persistently hopeless and despondent. So we're in the middle of some sort of relational crisis in society. And to me, one of the reasons for that, not the only one, but one of them is we just haven't learned how to be considerate toward each other in the concrete circumstances of life. Like, how do you listen well? How do you become a really good conversationalist?
So the book begins with the how, right? Just sort of how to pay attention to a person, how to really engage. It's really sort of a how-to. All of these really wonderful practical tips. And then you get to chapter 8. And David Brooks, you just laid out all of these things, and then you wrote, and I want to read it for you. So far, I've been describing a process of getting to know someone as if we live in normal times. I've been writing this as if we live in a healthy cultural environment in a society in which people are enmeshed in communities and webs of friendship, trust, and belonging. We don't live in such a society, end quote. It was a gut punch.
No, I'm bringing you down. Sorry. But it sets up what I think is, so the early stuff, like how to be a good listener,
Right.
the tips for how to be a good conversationalist, those are happy tips and easy.
Yeah.
But there are so many times we have painful conversations these days. And the two main sources of painful conversation, which I try to describe in the book, the first is the political conversation. And because we just went through an election season, I always do a lot of travel, but I did especially a lot of travel this fall.
Yeah.
And I was in blue places, like Boston or Philadelphia, and red places in rural Nebraska, rural Kansas, West Texas, rural Ohio. And the chasm between the two seems to me just bigger than ever. And then the conversations across suffering.
Yeah.
So sitting with someone who's just lost a child, or one of my chapters in the book is about how to sit with someone who's depressed.
Yeah.
And so it just seemed the graduate level of knowing somebody well is how to know someone well in hard circumstances, which we're in the middle of an age with a lot of bitterness and polarization and depression. So it's tough seas.
What are the things in society right now that you see that are helping to bridge?
Yeah, that's not hard either. There are so many. So in 2017, I created something called Weave, the Social Fabric Project. And it was based on the idea that social distrust is a real problem. 2 generations ago, if you asked people, do you trust your neighbors? 60% said yes. Now 30% say yes, and 19% of the millennials. So we have a lot of distrust in this society. But there are people in every neighborhood who are building trust at the local level.
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking of, there's a guy in Houston named Pancho Arguelles, and he used to run something called the Living Hope Wheelchair Society. He would take guys who'd been injured in construction accidents and were paralyzed, and he'd give them wheelchairs and diapers and catheters so they could lead dignified lives. He'd offer them training on how to be social workers. So you're in Houston and 25 guys in the wheelchairs are wheeling into your neighborhood to help solve your neighborhood's problems. And the guy who did this, his name is Pancho Arguelles, and he just is spreading trust by being selflessly serving a community. And I once said to Pancho, you just radiate holiness. And he said, no, I just reflect holiness, which is the right answer. And so those people everywhere, we go into any town in Detroit or McCook, Nebraska, or Wilkes, North Carolina, and we just say, who's trusted here? And people give us names. And sometimes, like Pancho, they run an organization. Sometimes they're just neighbors.
You've talked in this conversation and in the book a lot about loneliness and sort of the impact that we're seeing in society. I'm curious about if we, right, the royal we, don't choose this path of kindness and caring for each other, what happens? Like, where do we go from here? I think a lot of folks are wondering in society today.
Well, societies fall apart when distrust is high and people can't work together because they don't trust each other. Societies fall apart when there's no moral order that's cohesive, holding them together. They fall apart when we don't have a common story. So a diverse, pluralistic society like ours needs to be united by a common story. We're all moving together towards some end. But then the very act of being considerate to one another, it sounds like minute and not that important. But societies break apart when that doesn't happen, because people feel existentially lonely. Because when we are isolated, we not only feel sad, but we feel mean. Because when you feel unseen, you feel under threat. That's how we evolved. And you feel your dignity is being insulted, which it is. People are not recognizing me for the human being that I am. And so you want to lash out. And there's a guy named Ryan Streeter at the University of Texas who did a study finding that people who self-identify as lonely are 7 times more likely to be active in politics than other people. So what happens is people go to politics as an attempt to cure their social loneliness. Because politics seems to offer belonging. I'm team red or I'm team blue. But it's not belonging like being a part of a community. It's just hating the other people. And it seems to offer a path of righteousness. I can doing something with the country, but you're not sitting with a widow or serving the poor. You're just hating people on Twitter.
Well, the book that we've been talking about is How to Know a Person, The Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen. David Brooks, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. It's really been fun.
I reached out to Carlos Whitaker, author, podcaster, and someone well-versed in bringing together people from all over the world. And if anyone could help me figure out how Jesus' way speaks to rebuilding the connections that our discontents have eroded, it would be Carlos.
I think sometimes people confuse empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is feeling bad for someone. Empathy is feeling bad with someone or feeling good with someone. And it's that withness that I think is going to bring us closer and is going to help a lot of this discontentment that so many people are feeling.
It's almost exactly what I experienced out there on the road. So if empathy is so important, where does it come from? How do we harness it?
I believe that empathy is actually born out of curiosity. And I think it's kind of like a dominoes falling in a row. And let me tell you what those dominoes that I see are. Curiosity will lead to empathy. Empathy will lead to trust. Trust then leads to relationship. And relationship leads to change. And change ultimately is what we're all going for here. But I don't think that we can get to change until we start with curiosity.
If we're going to solve discontent, Do we have to? Do we have to deal with the stuff that we don't want to, the people that we don't want to? Like, do I have to get curious about people whose politics I find abhorrent?
That's the hard work at hand. That's the hard work. Every single person that you spoke to across the country had a very real and valid pain point in their life.
Did Jesus do that? Did he get curious about the things that he found abhorrent?
Absolutely. Jesus, gosh, I feel like Jesus was dealing on a daily basis with people that were doing abhorrent things. Think of Jesus. He was walking down the road and there's this tax collector named Zacchaeus. And in the Bible, it just tells of the story how Zacchaeus, nobody liked him. He was taking people's money. And it says he was really little, so he had to climb up a tree in order to see Jesus. And Jesus was empathetic towards Zacchaeus, and he walked up to the tree. He didn't try to change who Zacchaeus was while Zacchaeus was in the tree. He invited himself over to Zacchaeus' house for a meal. And that's where the change began to happen. Isn't that crazy? How it wasn't shouting out how you need someone else to change, but you got to get close. Jesus had to get close to Zacchaeus. And then it says that Zacchaeus literally changed his life because of the proximity that Jesus had with him, which that proximity led to empathy, which led to change.
Proximity. Now, there's a great word to describe what we did out there. Like Jesus, we often found ourselves in people's homes. For example, at the bottom of a hill in Arizona, we found ourselves with Robert, a caring father struggling in recovery. And he's grown pretty sick of the guy staring back at him in the mirror. But I was curious if he felt alone in his struggle.
I think I've been through a hefty fair share of suffering. But like what's gotten me through is just surrounding myself with people that love me. Even in my worst, like, you know, my fiance tells me something. She says, if I can't love you at your worst, then I shouldn't love you at your best. And she loved me at my worst, man. I think that's what's helped me together too, is just her positivity brushing off on me. But I got a lot of demons, man. Got a lot of demons.
Did you feel with Robert? Moreover, did you catch a reflection of yourself in him? That last part, about the love his fiancée shows him, I confess I felt that. And it makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the love that's with us at our worst can help us be with others once we're in a better place. Maybe that's the final domino in Carlos's empathy framework. Change carries us away from our own discontents and toward another's. Maybe Jesus' curiosity isn't just a pithy lesson, but the bridge we've been searching for this whole time. Shocker, people are sick of quite a bit. Political division, financial instability, biased news, gun violence, the cost of healthcare. The list goes on and on. These categories paint a decent picture of where we're at on the surface. But as a storyteller, I'm in search of the subtext. And the more I attempted to listen like Jesus, the more I began to hear it.
I'm sick of how people use their phones. We have this device that's supposed to bring us together, but instead, more than often than not, separates us.
Would it be fair to say that you're sick of not being seen? And I mean that like in a kind of a deep sense.
Yeah, I think I have these friendships, but then I don't feel important enough that someone can look up from their phone for 5 seconds to give me a wave or a smile.
I'm sick of being alone. My relationship with my dad wasn't so great. Most of my life, I've just wanted to be loved.
Have you ever been married?
I have been married. I was very independent. I had my faults for sure. And I was still carrying around that pain from my childhood. My dad judged me, and I became a judge in the marriage. And I wish I could have been kinder, more gracious, not so much a judge.
Now, I want to pause here because I feel a shift taking shape in my mind. Listening this way, being fully present without judgment. It's like there's something bubbling beneath the surface of these answers. In every complaint, I hear a confession. Or maybe better said, in every complaint, I hear a personal revelation.
I'm sick of things being abandoned, things being run down, sick of nobody doing anything about it.
Do you feel abandoned?
Oh, yeah. At a young age, I was adopted because my parents wanted to do drugs and not worry about me. Christmas came one day, was sold the next for their next high. So yeah, I've always felt like I need to care for people, places, and things. You gotta be a caring person in this world to make the world go round. And if nobody cared, then nothing's gonna change.
Why is it that common sense sounds like a revelation when it comes from the mouths of everyday people? Was it like this in Jesus' day? Did he hear confessions of disillusionment and dissatisfaction in everyday complaints? That Jesus listened well isn't a revelation. But what's been surprising, for me at least, is how his way of listening makes room for something a little harder to name. And if we have any hope of stopping the spread of all this discontent, we're going to need some help understanding what this thing I've been experiencing really is. If nobody cares, nothing is going to change.
In an age where technology continues to dominate our lives, social media has emerged as both a blessing and a curse. It's undeniable that these platforms have revolutionized the way we connect, share, and communicate. However, beneath it all lies a darker truth. Social media addiction is on the rise, and with it come a set of serious issues that I noticed are also affecting me. The interesting thing is that until recently, I didn't really look at it as an addiction at all. Yet every day I would be on these apps for hours, mindlessly scrolling and keeping myself busy. For me, it's two in particular, Instagram and TikTok. On Instagram, I would see what everyone else was doing, constantly refreshing the feed for new posts, stories, and messages. On TikTok, with the algorithm just feeding me content, I don't even have to think of what I want to watch because the app knows it better than me. Whenever I open it, time just passes by. It could be 5 minutes, it could also be an hour or two. The platforms are designed to be addictive, and it makes sense because the more time you spend there, the more the companies profit. But that's all I thought of it, a way of procrastinating and wasting my time, which of course is bad by itself, yet I didn't really see anything else to it. As time passed, I began to realize that my constant scrolling was also taking a toll on my mental health. I slowly became aware of it, and quite often when using these apps, I would ask myself, what am I even getting from this? And the answer would always remain the same. I wasn't really getting anything. it was always much more negative than positive, if there even was anything positive from it. They say that comparison is the thief of joy, and on these apps, everyone just seems to have it all figured out. I was comparing my life to these curated, idealized versions of others, and it made me feel like I'm falling behind. There were times when I had trouble appreciating where I was or what I was doing because others would be someplace more nice, doing bigger and better things. I would see people hanging out and having fun while I'm alone at home, and it would feel lonely. It would feel like I was missing out, even if I didn't want to do anything that day. Getting bombarded by ads and seeing all of the cool things or outfits people have feeded my consumerism. It made it seem like I don't have enough and need more. Beautiful moments would pass me by because I was too busy taking pictures for a good post or story. Afterwards, I would be constantly checking who liked and commented on it, subconsciously seeking external validation. And don't get me started on the endless stream of news and opinions. It's all overwhelming, only fueling my anxiety and stress. I finally decided to look at my screen time, and it was clearly too much. It became clear that my social media use had shifted from a harmless pastime to a harmful habit. It was an addiction in disguise, one that had come into my life without me even noticing. I'm not saying that you should delete all social media apps and that it will completely change your life. But if you ever felt the way I did, it's worth taking a step back to reflect on it. Is it adding value to your life or taking away from it?
Emily, we are quite literally driving around the country asking people one question. What are you sick of?
I'm sick of feeling ugly.
A comment like Emily's makes me think we have a lot more in common than we realize. We may not share the same reason why, but most of us carry something. A hurt, a shame, an insecurity that we're sick of, and it makes us feel ugly too. Remember that data we began with? The most staggering of all its numbers was this one. 97% of us are sick of something. Which reminded me of a story Carlos told me.
If you look at Matthew chapter 9, where Jesus was getting some flack for hanging out with people that weren't like him. Why are you hanging out with these people, these sinners, quote unquote? And Jesus says to them, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. So Jesus was curious about the people that the super religious people did not want him to be curious about. So there is my assignment. Jesus made a decision that my reputation is not as important as the people that I believe need me.
That hits home.
I was diagnosed with alopecia areata when I was 6 years old. I didn't have a lot of close people in my life. I was completely bald, had a wig, no eyebrows, no eyelashes, the whole 9 yards. In helping stress. My body pushes my hair out, especially being in college. I'm losing a lot right now, but that's expected because of the stress that I'm under.
What are you studying in school?
So I am studying early childhood education. Not only do I have a love for children, being with them and hearing their thoughts and their ideas, but I also love that spark that they get when they finally understand whatever you've been trying to teach them. That's what I feed off of.
Can you hear it? Where your stress began and where you've pointed your whole life towards wanting to take care of kindergartners?
Yeah.
Are you trying to just pick up little Emily and tell her, I got you, girl.
I guess so.
Have you ever thought of that before?
I think it makes a lot of sense. Oh, sorry.
You have to notice something to be curious about, and that's how Jesus walked. You have to notice your own pain in order to get curious about it. You have to notice other people's pains, and I think that will lead us to the empathy that could heal our fractured world.
I think healing would look like joy. I think healing would look like people going on and smiling.
Being real with others, being vulnerable with others is how we let people see that we are not perfect.
I was always taught to turn the other cheek. You don't have to respond in anger.
Somebody might be having a horrible day. You say something to them or help them out, that could change their day.
Take a deep breath. I feel like that's something that's so simple.
Love thy neighbor.
As what?
As you would love yourself.
Jesus didn't walk the earth just to like hang out with people. He walked the earth very specifically to change people. He was curious, he was empathetic, he was trustworthy, he had relationships, and he helped people change.
When we share our struggles, literally hold one another's discontent, they don't magically go away. But a pathway opens up, making it possible to move through the difficulty. What once made us feel alone starts to put us back together. Out on the road, I asked a simple question. What are you sick of? But Jesus, he went deeper. He once asked a man worn down by 38 years of discontent, do you want to be made well? So, I don't know. Do we?
About 15 years ago, we witnessed the beginning of a digital revolution.
It's essentially an online directory for students where people can go and look up other people and find relevant information about them.
Suddenly, all the world's information was in our pockets, and we were connected to each other like never before.
A widescreen iPod with touch controls, a revolutionary mobile phone, and a breakthrough internet communications device. This is one device, and we are calling it iPhone.
But then things began to change.
The dark side of technology.
Something went wrong.
The way the service is designed is fundamentally to be manipulative.
And the story of information and connection gave way to one of addiction and distraction.
There's a whole playbook of techniques that get used to get you using the product for as long as possible.
It's exactly the kind of thing that a hacker like myself would come up with because you're exploiting a vulnerability in human psychology.
The short-term dopamine-driven feedback loops that we have created are destroying how society works.
So what happened? What changed? And are these fears part of a new moral panic?
Social media in its original incarnation, it was like MySpace. It was like, look at me, here are my friends. And that's fine. That, it might encourage some, narcissistic self-promotion, but it's not dangerous to democracy in any way.
It's important to point out that the most worrying design features weren't built into social media from the beginning.
Everything changed 10 years ago. When the smartphone came out, when the iPhone came out, everything changed.
The advent of smartphones drastically increased the potential time and attention these services could capture.
Now we've started to look at what was the impact of having a computer on your body 24/7. I think it's really significant to see this period, 2009 to 2012. Facebook introduces the like button, and now there's huge amounts of information that allows them to algorithmicize the newsfeed. Twitter invents the retweet button, and so now, click, click, and a couple people do it, you reach millions of people.
Designers didn't come up with all these clever techniques on their own. They had help.
Behavioral scientists have aided tech companies in changing the way they present their technology. Behavioral scientists are able to say, if you present your technology this way, it will get more eyeballs on your app, on your website.
Some of the core ideas here come from behaviorism, a school of psychology that dates back more than a century.
This bird is already conditioned to eat when the magazine sounds and the light flashes.
Behaviorists showed that simple reward and punishment schemes could be used to condition new behaviors. Paired with other features like steady progress and social validation, these techniques can foster behavioral addiction.
Maybe the earliest examples were gambling, cases of gambling, where you could interact with a machine that had been perfectly designed to capture you and capture your interest and attention just by dishing out just the right kinds of rewards on the right kind of schedule. But now, in the world of screens that we're inhabiting, there are so many different behavioral addictions.
And it's not accidental, it's on purpose. I mean, for example, some of the social media sites pride themselves on holding back your likes or whatever their little pat on the back is, then lumping them together because they know that more likes together make you feel better, maybe give you a little bit bigger squirt of dopamine.
Facebook went from having this button that said load more, where you could click the button and the newsfeed would unspool further. Now what happens is you scroll and you're like, I feel like I'm scrolling forever, and it's because you can scroll forever. It's designed that way, it's infinite scroll.
Snapchat, for example, came up with the idea of streaks. They're gamifying their technology.
All of this is by design. If you can remove every possible friction point, people never hit a roadblock and they just sit there. They just keep doing it.
Sadly, we're all part of a grand experiment. We have no earthly clue what it means to give a 10-year-old a smartphone, and how is that going to change them?
But some scientists are skeptical of the addiction framing. They point out that even benign technologies like the radio faced similar critiques in the past.
Yeah, these companies are using psychology to create, apps and systems that are really sticky and people want to use them. I found myself reaching for a phone, but why addiction?
This is Jeff Hancock, director of the Social Media Lab at Stanford. His team did one of the largest meta-analyses of social media's effect on well-being.
To set it up, it's 12 years, all the way up until the end of 2018. A small effect size is 0.2, and so ours is 0.01, with a confidence interval of minus 0.02 to positive 0.04. In other words, we have a very precise estimate, and it is 0.
So if the effects are so small, how did this concern get started? One of the first psychologists to sound the alarm about screens and social media was Jean Twenge back in 2017. Twenge pointed to worrying correlations between the rise of social media and declining teen mental health. But the large datasets Twenge was using make it very easy to find statistically significant results. This means that minor decisions about how to analyze the data can have a massive effect on the findings. To combat this, researchers at Oxford reanalyzed the same dataset using a novel statistical technique called specification curve analysis. Basically, this allowed them to look at all possible analyses of the data, eliminating researcher decision-making altogether.
So when you do a meta-analysis across all the studies and you look at the psychological impact of technology, you probably find a net effect close to 0. That isn't the whole story.
One problem is that a lot of the early research uses screen time as a metric.
I think it's silly to say that screens are monolithic and that there's only one thing we do on screens and that it's all bad. That's ridiculous. If you spend 4 hours reading a book on a screen, that's very different from spending 4 hours scrolling through Instagram posts.
The large-scale studies that show these correlations that account for a small amount of the variance, those generally are looking at all screen time for all kids. And then they conclude that the effect is very small, not larger than eating potatoes or something like that. But in their own data, in the data of people who do these studies, if you just look at social media, actually the effect gets much larger. And if you look at it just for girls, the effect gets much larger still. So the closer you get to zooming in on the hypothesis that social media is harming girls, especially young girls, then you see that the effect is much larger than is commonly talked about.
In later work, Orban and her colleagues did look at social media's effects on girls in particular, finding small but negative effects. And some researchers have argued that their initial analysis contained biased choices of its own. But the debate is far from settled, and the research has a lot of room to improve.
All of this research is assuming what's called a dose-response model. That is, social media is harmful to the person who uses it a lot. But social media completely changes social networks. Even if the dose-response effect is not big, when you change teenage life so that there's not much face-to-face interaction anymore, even if you're not on a lot, the fact that there's no one to play with, the fact that if you go outside, there's no one there, the fact that everyone is doing this, so you're excluded, means that the effect of social media could be a gigantic effect on the entire generation around the planet, or at least in a lot of countries. And yet the dose-response effect could still be quite small.
Social media and smartphones deserve careful scrutiny, whatever the verdict on screens and teens turns out to be. Over a few short years, these tools have redirected the attention of more than 1 billion users, and we're just beginning to understand their effects. In part 2, we'll look at how social media impacts politics, and see if the tide of moral outrage and polarization can be turned.
The more urbanized our lifestyles become, the lonelier we are. One study found that being in an overcrowded environment increased a sense of loneliness by up to 38%. It's completely counterintuitive, but as somebody who lived in New York City for 7 years, it totally makes sense.
Why is that? You could be surrounded by people. This one kind of blows my mind a little bit. Surrounded by people, all sorts of opportunities for connection, and yet still feel so lonely. What is that all about?
So in New York, I think it was 2 things. One was there are so many opportunities to do interesting things with interesting people that you rarely run into the same people more than a couple times a year. And again, coming back to the frequency and the consistency piece, real friendships are built by seeing the same person 10, 20, 30 times. In New York, it's so hard to see the same person 10, 20 times. I have friends in New York that maybe in the entire time I lived there, I saw them 10 times.
Wow.
Yeah, it's just everybody's doing their own thing. People are traveling all the time. People are busy. They're working. The second thing that I experienced in New York is once you hit a living environment of a certain critical mass, you don't feel valued. You feel insignificant. Every city that I've lived in that was, say, under 4 million people, 5 million people, even though it's a big city and there's a lot of stuff going on, I feel like I'm part of the city. I feel like I'm contributing to the city. I'm contributing to the economy. I'm taking part in various events and activities. I'm meeting people in different areas of the city. New York is so big that it just feels like this, it doesn't give a fuck. Like you could come, you could go. It doesn't matter how much money you have. It doesn't matter how much stuff you do. New York City doesn't give a fuck. You are a gnat on the back of an elephant. And there's something that doesn't feel good about that. Coming back to your point about the accountability, I think if you live in a small town, anything you participate in, there's a certain amount of importance and meaning that comes with that. And you feel accountable to that. You're like, okay, I showed up to this group in my town and I'm a part of it and people rely on me now. And that feels good. Feeling that accountability and responsibility to something, being a part of something greater than yourself. If your participation feels pointless, then you don't feel that accountability or responsibility. I used to tell my friends that I felt like a tourist who was just staying in New York for 7 years.
I'm a little more optimistic about this one, though, because I think we will figure that out. We've only been a majority urban species for less than 20 years, right? It was the late 2000s where finally more than half the population started living in cities. That's the first time in history that's ever happened. So it's been less than 20 years. I think we'll figure it out. I think we just urbanize so quickly that we haven't had time to think about what are the social implications of rapid growth and rapid densification of these cities. There's new research coming out around adding green spaces, for example, into cities. That actually reduces loneliness by quite a bit. There's this researcher, Eric Kleinenberg, who is a social scientist and a writer, and he talks a lot about the social infrastructure of places, which is very important. That's things like green spaces, parks, libraries, but also, a commercial area that's dense and people can walk to and interact with each other. And you go to your local butcher or whatever it is. Like you were talking about with the restaurants, if you have these restaurants that have been in a neighborhood for generations or something like that. I think there's actually a solution here. It's not as easy as people are saying right now. It's like, oh, you just need to talk to somebody more often. No, I think it's a deeper structural problem than that, but I think it is a problem we can solve.
The social infrastructure point's really interesting because my experience of living in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, I feel like they do it a lot better. I don't know exactly why, but like when you actually go spend a bunch of time in like France or Germany, there are dozens and dozens of these little smaller cities and towns that are really interconnected, and it's easy to get between them. And you see that each one has its own little individual community with continuity, and people know each other. So I don't know how much of that's culture. I don't know how much of that's policy. I don't know how much of that's history, but it definitely seems clear to me that this is something that those parts of the world do better than North Americans seem to do. And from what I can tell, this shows up in the data as well. I mean, it seems that Europeans are doing better on these measurements than we are. I definitely think there is something to this social infrastructure thing, but I'm not sure how easily we can just kind of wave a magic wand and improve it.
Yeah, I think along with the urbanization thing, though, too, there's some other trends that go along with it. First of all, the rate of living alone, of single person households, that's risen consistently for the last like 60 years across the developed world. And if you look at the United States, for example, it went from 7.7% in 1940. Those single person households were 7.7%. And in 2020, it was 27.6%. I mean, that's a 400% increase in 80 years. This trend has been seen in other places as well. Across Europe, it's over 30% of the households are single person households. In Sweden, it's over half. In Japan, it's 40%. However, those last two, Sweden and Japan, also report some of the lowest loneliness of any of the developed countries as well. So it's not just living alone. Again, I think it's that social infrastructure thing we're talking about. Sweden has a lot of social programs that get people out of their homes and interacting with one another. So yeah, I think the social infrastructure really is the key part. It's not just, getting people to live together or spending more time together necessarily. It's building cities in a way that get people interacting on a daily basis and getting into that more friction of life.
One of the things that I saw this in a documentary. It was about happiness. One thing they did in Denmark, which I thought was brilliant, was they built these residential buildings with condos and stuff, and they would zone them specifically so that you could only live there if you were either retired or a single parent. And so they basically designed these condo buildings so that single parents always had babysitters because the retired people were there all the time with nothing to do. And then retired people always had something to do because there's always a neighbor somewhere down the hall that needs their kids babysat while they're at work. So it was really fascinating. When I think social infrastructure, I think that strikes me as like just an excellent example of thinking in those terms, of thinking of like, okay, how can we not only provide people housing, but meaningful housing that's actually going to maintain their emotional and mental well-being.
That's one of the solutions I'm talking about, which is why I'm optimistic about this. I think there's going to be some cities who figure it out, and then we're going to replicate that eventually. The United States will be slow to do it like we are with everything else, but I think it'll happen.
Why do you think, so more people are living alone? I can think of a few reasons why that would happen. One is just, I think as people get more money. It's easier to rent a place for yourself or buy a place for yourself. One of the things that we come across all the time is that marriages and cohabitation between partners, romantic partners, is down, an all-time low, essentially. I feel like there's got to be some sort of connection there. And again, I just keep coming back to this point of friction, of like the hidden cost of removing social friction. Marriages are hard. They're a pain in the ass. And so if you have the financial means to avoid them, I think a lot of people will avoid them.
Yes. Yes. Especially women. The research has borne that out as well. Higher SES women marry less.
So women with more money marry less. That goes down a whole nother rabbit hole that we could probably spend an entire episode on. I mean, the whole marriage question is really fascinating because despite the erroneous statistic that 50% of marriages end in divorce, that has not been true in like 30 or 40 years. Actually, the story around marriage is way more interesting and nuanced, which is fewer and fewer people are marrying. They're marrying later, and they're marrying after they've become economically independent. And so more of those marriages are succeeding since basically the divorce laws changed in the 70s. So marriage is actually in a really good place quality-wise, maybe the best place it's ever been, but quantity-wise, it's at an all-time low. So it's almost like people are only getting married if they're really confident it's going to work. And since you're usually not confident it's going to work, they don't get married.
Yeah, we grew up with all those stats of, half the marriages will end in divorce, and of the other half, 90% of those are probably not happy marriages anyway. So we heard all of that.
I still hear those stats on podcasts. I heard it like 2 weeks ago. I heard it on a podcast, like a very reputable podcast too. And I was like, when are people going to update this fucking stat in their head? Like, it has not been true in decades. The true divorce rate, it's been dropping for decades. And I think now it's down close to around 30%. So it's still, I mean, not great.
Right. And as you pointed out, it's probably due to people marrying later and waiting until they're financially secure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Do you think this relates at all to the urban living?
Yes, I absolutely do. They've shown, like in developing countries, when people urbanize rapidly, when they move from the rural areas to the cities, they will marry less. And usually it is economically related, what they find. While the people are earning more money, the cost of living is higher. You have less space, right? So you're living in an apartment versus like a house, maybe on an acreage or something like that, or a communal plot of land out in the countryside. People they get married less. Part of it's probably too, you're surrounded by more people, so you think you have more options maybe. There's a paradox of choice maybe going on a little bit there.
The paradox of choice thing makes sense to me. And also, I just feel like people who live in big cities are busy all the fucking time. They're working 60 hours a week. They're going out.
Dating is a little fun hobby maybe for them every now and then, but it's not taking up their lives.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of New York, I had a number of friends who were just literally like, I don't have time to date, which maybe that's a big part. I was really surprised by that stat. I think it was 57% of single people say that they are not interested in dating or they've given up trying to date.
That's crazy to me.
Yeah, that's mind-blowing. And I wonder how much of that is simply a lack of free time, how much of that is people in their 60s, 70s, 80s who are just like, whatever, I'm done. And how much of that is just legitimate burnout, frustration, hopelessness.
Technology allows a scale and speed of opinion creation that is extremely seductive to our brain.
Social media has thrust us all onto the head of a pin, socially speaking, existentially speaking. We all exist in this world where we can tweet at somebody, even if they're on the other side of the planet, even if they have a lot more money than we do, we can still compete with them on engagement.
Everything is being done by teams of engineers to actually capture your attention and keep it there. Your attention is the product. We aren't in the present moment.
Every time you go online, you are in a funhouse of mirrors.
I'm Luke Burgess, founder of Fourth Wall Ventures, professor of business, and author of the book Wanting: The Power of Mimetic Desire in Everyday Life.
We all exist in this world where we can tweet at somebody or engage with somebody, could even be the President of the United States, and they might react to us back. Social media has thrust us all onto the head of a pin, socially speaking, existentially speaking. Even if they're on the other side of the planet, even if they have a lot more money than we do, we can still interact with them. We can still compete with them on engagement. They're inside of our world. We have a mimetic machine in our pocket where all of these people exist. So what is mimetic desire? Mimetic desire means that we're adopting another person's desire as our own, usually without even realizing that we're doing it. So social media has given us millions of mimetic models that we now have to contend with. Some people have went from having 10 mimetic models to now having 1 million, and we haven't quite come to grips as a culture with what that means for our mental and emotional health. There are 2 kinds of mimetic models. The first kind is called an external mediator of desire. These are models that are outside of our world. Whether because they exist in a different social sphere than we do, there's no possibility of us coming into contact with them, and certainly not becoming rivals with them. They're in some sense outside of our world of desire, outside of our world of competition. Now, these external models of desire can be real or they can be fictional. The other kind of model is inside of our world, called internal mediators of desire. These are people that we do come into contact with, and there is a possibility of conflict or rivalry with these people. These are people that are in our family. These are people in our workplace. These are people that could even be our friends. It's easier to compare ourselves to them. These are the kinds of people that we look to as benchmarks, and we're far more likely to be envious of somebody that we went to high school with who now has a great job and a beautiful spouse than we are to be envious of the richest person in the world. The danger with external mediators of desire, with keeping up with people that are very successful, with people that have modeled a certain kind of lifestyle, is that there's no end to that process. All desire is a form of transcendence. We desire to go beyond the boundaries, to go just over the mountain, to be the kind of person that we don't feel that we currently are. Having positive models of desire to emulate is a very good thing. It's important to have people that model virtues and goodness that we would like. But we have to understand the limitations of any model. And understanding how the dynamic between us and our models changes in that scenario is really, really important. It's also important to understand when somebody is an internal model of desire to us, because in that case, we have to have boundaries. All desire comes from us feeling like we lack something. And that can bring us into a dangerous, vicious cycle, because there will always be another model to find. We have to choose our models wisely. We also have to know when the model is inflaming us with the desire for something that's going to bring real fulfillment, or whether it's going to bring a dopamine hit or allow us to fantasize about a life that we'll probably never have, and even if we did have it, would probably make us miserable. All you need to do is go on Instagram and spend 5 minutes, and you see lifestyles modeled. You see vacation destinations modeled, fashions, manners of speech, ways of engagement, ways of speaking, political preferences. All of these desires are modeled for us 24 hours a day, billions of them. And we need to understand the mimetic landscape of social media, or else we'll become totally controlled by it.
The greatest strength of social media is its democratizing tendency. We don't have to just look to elites and a few news outlets to tell us about us. We can actually communicate with each other. But when we engage online, we tend to think that we're interacting with a reasonable sample of the actual population. But it's not true. Close to 80% of all content on social media is generated by about 10% of the users. That 10% tends to be extreme on most social issues. They are the vocal fringe. When you have a vocal minority that is perceived as the majority, critical mass of us will actually either self-silence or we will actually go along to get along, and it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. This is how collective illusions form. It's not terribly surprising that some of the first people to start to use these tools to manipulate were leaders who need consensus to conserve power.
Venezuela no le temblará el pulso para combatir a los grupos terroristas.
An example of this is Nicolas Maduro, the leader of Venezuela. For a long time, it looked like on social media that he had a pretty good beat on the consensus of the people that he led. So almost everything that he would say, stories that were written about him that were positive, would be retweeted and shared, and it looked like this represented some kind of consensus. But it turned out a significant percentage of his so-called followers were actually what we call social bots. These are fake accounts that only exist to retweet anything positive about him or that he said, and importantly, to attack the opposition. When Twitter banned them, the real consensus was with the opposition. And that started to emerge and be retweeted as more and more people recognized that it was okay to say what they actually thought. Social media is a free-for-all in terms of who can shout the loudest and who can silence other people in the name of masquerading as a majority and manufacturing collective illusions. Your willingness to conform and your unwillingness to challenge what you think the group believes will actually contribute to leading the group astray. The solution to our online life is to get offline once in a while. The most important thing you can do is continue to have conversations with your family, with your neighbors, with your community. Don't carry that distortion over into the way you treat people in real life.
My name is Amishi Jha. I'm a neuroscientist and professor at the University of Miami, and the author of the book, Peak Mind: Find Your Focus, Own Your Attention, Invest 12 minutes a day. Where is your attention right now? The human brain's attention system is actually the success story of what makes us unique as human beings. Because attention fuels our ability to think, to feel, and connect. What we pay attention to is our life. For a long time through our evolutionary history, the brain started to suffer from a very big problem, which is that there's far more information out in the environment than could be fully processed. Attention ended up becoming a very useful solution because it allows us to prioritize information. But there are qualities of the human experience that disable attention. Given how powerful attention is, we need to really respect where we place this precious brain resource. The mind is no different than the body. The mind needs to be exercised daily to optimize our psychological well-being. Knowing this, I became very interested in understanding if we might be able to train attention. The brain's attention system is incredibly powerful. There's 3 big ways we use attention as a fuel for having success in our daily activities. We use our attention to actually think. During thinking, there's an idea that comes to mind, and then we hyperlink it to other ideas. That's what thought actually is. And the glue between those hyperlinks is attention. But it's not only used for the purposes of what we might call cognitive functioning. We also use our attention to feel. Think about the last time you actually had a joyful moment in your lives. If you weren't paying attention to it, chances are you missed it. You didn't get the benefit of the positive emotional response. Finally, the third area is connecting, our social interactions with other people. Without devoting attention, we don't experience care, and we can't extend care. In fact, you might say that paying attention to another person is our highest form of love. But while attention is so incredibly powerful, it's fragile and vulnerable. The 3 biggies that we've learned about in my labs are stress, threat, or negative mood. Maybe you could even say they're like kryptonite for attention. But we all know you can't live a life without experiencing stress, threat, or negative mood. A lot of our work with high-performing groups describe this feeling of not having full access to their attention when they need it most. So what are those circumstances? There's a shorthand that we can use to think about this. The term is VUCA: volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous. The world today feels like it's a constant VUCA environment. But there's another challenge that our attention faces, and why many of us feel like we're in an attentional crisis. Frankly, the brain was designed to be lured by, for our evolutionary success and survival, certain kinds of information. Threatening information, novel information, self-related information, and even things that are fun and enticing. I'm talking about the attention economy. Everything is being done by teams of engineers to actually capture your attention and keep it there. Your attention is the product. Finally, the mind can be hijacked away by something called mental time travel. That means that our attention is not in the present moment. So when we're thinking about the past, our attention is fully in the past. Same thing with the future. About 50% of our waking moments, we aren't in the present moment. Now, that may seem very disempowering, like how are we ever going to fight that fight? But the good news is that decades of research in my own lab and many others has now given us a solution. Mindfulness training, something that's been around for millennia. We can train our brain so that we do not need to fight. What we know is that when people practice mindfulness meditation, which is attending to the present moment, their attention is stronger. 12 minutes or more a day can cultivate something called meta-awareness. What is meta-awareness? It's the ability to be aware of the contents and processes of what's going on in our mind moment by moment. We're paying attention to our attention. Now, why would that awareness be beneficial? Because every time we are aware, we have more control. We can own our attention. And we have it available to us to not only enjoy the moments of our lives and feel fulfillment, but to meet the challenges and demands that we certainly will all face. Minds wander. It's a natural thing that the brain does. When our mind moves away, gently return it back. Simply begin again.
Young people are more lonely than older people. And from what I can tell, this is a Gen Z first. Usually, and I think anybody who can think back to their own adolescence, when you're a teenager or in your 20s, you're obsessed with your social life. It's like all you think about. And generally, when you're older, you have fewer, closer friends and you spend less time with them. And I think that's been typical forever. And I think historically, older people have tended to be lonelier or more socially isolated. But Gen Z seems to be bucking this trend, which is interesting. Thoughts?
I'm not sure if it's actually been the case that teens have always been less lonely than older people. As you just mentioned, when you're a teen, you are very, very focused on your social relationships. And so I think any change in your social relationship, you're very sensitive to that. Now, there's definitely some concerning trends with teens right now. The lack of face-to-face time, we've seen that plummet. In the early to mid 2000s, it was about 80% of teens said that they would hang out with their friends at least twice a week. That's dropped to below 60% today, which is insane. In just 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, there's been a huge drop. That's concerning for sure. Mental health obviously is not real great with the teens these days either. And loneliness plays a big part in that as well. Also, you're right. There is kind of this paradoxical thing going on though, where since the start of the millennium, middle-aged people have actually reported that they're getting less lonely. There's been like a 4 or 5% consistent drop since the early 2000s to today, that middle-aged people are getting less lonely, while teens are getting more lonely. So that's a strange thing. Lots of people have commented on this before, but we're over-regulating the physical space for young people while we're under-regulating the digital space for them. So that's kind of where they retreat to. And so of course they're going to be more lonely. As you get older too, I think your expectations adjust and you're like, I don't need 10,000 friends, or whatever. I don't need 10 friends even. I need 1 or 2 good ones. And so it's easier to find there. So I don't understand completely what's going on.
I feel like with dating, it compounds a lot of these things in a lot of ways, but I'm curious to hear your experience.
I've been thinking a lot about this, and dating apps prime people to look at the most superficial aspects of relationships, even if that's not something you value in a relationship. Let's say you're somebody who values intelligence or, some kind of like fuzzier concept in another individual that you're prospectively going to, get with. First of all, they're very visual, right? Like what this person looks like. You usually in your bios are super short. So you're going to put something like your job or maybe a few interests and something like that. Very superficial surface level things. It's like you're shopping on Amazon when you're using these apps, right? And so necessarily, I think it leads towards more superficial interactions and relationships and people because they are primed to look at those more superficial aspects of the person in general. So that I think is a big one that people miss. They think, well, it's easier to meet these people. Yes, it's easier to meet people, but you're meeting people and trying to connect with them on more superficial features of that person or the relationship.
When I look back at my dating experience, one thing that regularly happened was the women that I thought I was going to be really into, after a date or two, it turned out I wasn't really into them. And then the women that I didn't really think I would be that attracted to, I would hang out with them a few times. They'd be like a friend of a friend or something. And after 2 or 3 times, I'm like, wow, she's really cute. Like I'm kind of into her, like never would have guessed, never if she had put a profile on a site, never would have picked her. And that happened all the time. A lot of my best relationships and dating experiences happened with women that I probably would not have picked on Tinder or Hinge or whatever the kids use these days. So whenever this topic comes up, I remember that. I think about that a lot because we are so bad at knowing what we want to begin with. And as you said, the easiest things to filter people for are generally the things that matter the least, right? It's like, I want a guy who makes this much money and is this tall, and I want a girl who's looks like this, is into this hobby. Those are pretty superficial things. That's probably not going to map super accurately to who you're going to be happy with in a long-term relationship. It'll map a little bit, but not a whole lot. Whereas things that cannot be filtered for, personality, emotional history, culture, values, you can't filter for those things accurately without spending time with somebody and getting to know them for an extended period of time. So I just look at the whole dating app thing and it just feels like a system that is optimizing for the wrong things. It's optimizing for matching people based on what they think they want rather than accurately depicting what they actually want. And I don't think you can ever accurately depict those things because it's so hard to figure those things out in the first place.
Yeah, I can't remember where I heard this, but I heard this recently. And someone said, if you are on a dating app, say out loud what you're thinking while you're swiping, and you will probably be appalled at what comes up when you actually say it out loud. Because again, that's what these apps are doing. They're priming you for all of these, what you think you want or what they think people want in relationships, and it's not actually what you want.
Actually, this just reminded me of maybe a fourth reason why the technology is making us feel more alone despite connecting us, which is that it removes repercussions for negative feelings or negative statements. Let's say you meet a woman at a party and she's attractive, but like, I don't know, like let's say she has like a weird dimple or something. In person, you might notice it, but like you will immediately forget it and just be engrossed in whatever conversation you're having with her. But when you're online and you see her, it's like the only thing you can think of, or it's the only thing you notice. That's such a unrealistic facsimile of what a social interaction actually is. I wrote an article years and years and years ago called Why Everybody's an Asshole on the Internet. And it really looked at when you combine the pseudonymity of being able to post something and people don't really know who you are, combine that with the lack of repercussions and the lack of friction to comment or say something, you basically create this fast lane for any antisocial person who wants to wreak some emotional havoc to go hog wild, just like start fucking throwing bombs at people. And there's absolutely nothing that any of us can do about it.
Yeah, a big part of social connection, I think, in the real world is people who hold you accountable for your actions, for your words, for the way you behave. And that lack of accountability is missing online, but in the real world, it's actually part of the glue that holds us together too.
I would say too, the acceptance or tolerance of flaws or obnoxious things, right? Again, if I hang out with somebody in person and they say something like kind of annoys me, I just let it go and I move on to the next subject. Online though, you end up in like a flame war for 5 days. All of the classic measurements of teen health that we used to look at 30 years ago are actually in great places. Teen pregnancy, all-time low. Drug use, all-time low. Alcohol abuse, all-time low. Violent crime, all-time low. But the mental health side is the worst it's been maybe ever. And, you know, as a very surface level reading of the data, it seems like kids are trading in their weed and booze for TikTok and Snapchat.
And is that a bad thing, Mark?
I don't know. I don't know. So when I say when young people are obsessed with their social lives, where their brain is in their development is they are trying to figure out who they are. They're playing this long-term identity formation game. And to do that, they have to experiment a lot. They have to take risks. They have to measure themselves against their peers. And they need to build the first meaningful relationships of their life, aside from, you know, their parents. And I just feel like social media definitely scrambles a lot of that process for all the reasons that we talked about at the top of the show. You know, it provides the empty calories. It provides the semblance of connection instead of real connection. It prevents them from having to take social risks. But then when something does go wrong, they make a fool of themselves and it gets posted to TikTok and it goes viral at their school. Like they get punished excessively for anything that goes wrong. So it's like this funhouse mirror of a status game that is not actually an accurate representation of reality. And so I can see how it completely scrambles their ability to figure out who they are and what they care about and build any confidence around taking social risks or emotional risks. I get that. Like, that's definitely a mess. But then you throw on top of that they're being limited more in those face-to-face interactions, which are super important. I'm a big fan. There's a really obscure theory. Dan Siegel, he's a doctor at UCLA, psychiatrist. He's got this theory called interpersonal neurobiology. Interpersonal neurobiology is, the explain it to me like I'm 5 explanation of it is, humans are at our base a social species. And when our brain is developing, we develop in tandem. So, there's the popular concept of mirror neurons. So it's like when I see your facial expression, when I see how you feel, you express an emotion, and they can go and look and see the neurons that are firing in your brain. And as I am watching that expression on your face and sensing that feeling within you, similar neurons will fire in my brain, and I will empathize and start to feel a little bit of the same feeling that you're feeling. That's what empathy is, and that predominantly has to happen in a personal space. It's much harder for that to happen over a digital medium, even if you have Zuckerberg's VR headset. Siegel's hypothesis is that it turns out that is a huge component of our brain's development, that when you deprive young people of social interaction, of face-to-face social interaction, that they are not developing that empathy muscle, and they are literally not developing the neuronal patterns to experience and express emotions efficiently and manage them within themselves, to regulate them. And you look at how there seems to be this like delayed emotional development in each generation. And meanwhile, you look at these charts of like how much time people spend face to face over the last 40 years, and the chart's just like fucking nosediving. I don't know. It's hard for me to not see these things as related to each other. I know there's some talk of policy change around social media, of like not letting kids under 16 onto it and not allowing phones at school. Those are probably good ideas. But for all the reasons I just said, like, I don't know if that's going to solve this. Like, until we start letting kids go be kids, go outside and tell them they don't have to be home till sundown, I just feel like that's a huge component that is maybe undersold.
Well, yeah, to your point there, objectively, we are in one of the safest periods ever. There's been blips along the way, of course, but crime rates are lower. Violent crime especially is down. It really is a safer world than what we grew up in, and yet we had more freedom in the physical world than kids do today. You can't blame the kids there. This is on us. This is our fault. We're fucking the kids up. So when you want to sit here and you want to say, oh, kids these days, it's like, no, this is on us. They're not responsible for that. We're the ones taking that away from them. And I think we need to take some responsibility for that. For example, passing some legislation maybe to give some more protection digitally, and then opening up the real world a little bit more for them. I do think probably when these kids grow up, they're going to look back and say, how did they just give us these screens and let us go fucking wild and not let us into these real world spaces and socialize like we should have. I don't know if this was your case, but me growing up in middle America anyway, like smoking. You remember that? That was everywhere. Restaurants, bars. I'd have friends, parents who smoked, and we'd be in the car and they'd just be smoking, like 3-4 kids in the car with them, and they'd be smoking. And we look at that today and we're like, that is crazy. I think there might be some sort of parallel when this generation grows up and they look back and they're like, oh my God, they let us do that? Why?
It's a wild and crazy world, Drew.
As we scroll endlessly through curated lives and filtered realities, it's easy to forget that the world beyond the screen is raw, imperfect, and deeply human. Social media promised connection, yet we've never felt more isolated. It sold us validation, but left us questioning our worth. The algorithm knows what we crave, but does it know who we really are? But beyond the noise, there's something more: empathy, understanding, and the power to truly listen. We judge quickly, speak louder than we hear, and dismiss perspectives that challenge our own. Understanding requires more than a quick glance. It demands patience, openness, and the courage to see others beyond their opinions. Maybe it's not just the digital world that's disconnected. Maybe it's us. It's time to step back and ask, are we living for likes or for something real? Are we shaping our own narratives or letting invisible forces script our lives? Disconnect from the noise. Reconnect with yourself. And most importantly, reconnect with each other. Because in a world where everyone's watching, the most powerful thing you can be is present.